All right, and welcome to the Inward Investing Podcast. I'm Mike Ritter, and I have a very special guest today, somebody I'm particularly excited about. Her name is Diana Rogers. She's a registered dietitian, and I'm going to go ahead and let you take it from here. Diana, let's talk a little bit about you, where you're from, and what you have going on.
Sure. All right. I am a registered dietitian, as you mentioned. I am currently really cold here in New England, and I'm jealous that you're sitting outside. I live on a working organic farm. We're currently in lambing season, so we're having lots of lambs daily, which is kind of exciting, especially for the dogs. So we have a organic vegetable CSA, and we do pasture-raised meats here as well. And then my primary business is as a dietitian. So I have a clinical practice up the street in Concord, Massachusetts, where I mostly focus on weight loss, metabolic health, and GI issues. And I'm particularly interested in that intersection between sustainability and optimal human nutrition. And so that's really led me to a pretty active side job fighting for regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, and to call it a side job, I think is an understatement. And we're gonna talk a lot more about that. But the regenerative agriculture thing, I think is something that the term might go over some people's heads right now. So I guess try to define what regenerative agriculture really means.
Sure. Well, there are, everyone's probably very familiar with typical industrial scale agriculture with large fields of just one crop, usually heavily sprayed, not the best for the environment. Then when I started my blog, Sustainable Dish, the idea behind the word sustainable was better than organic, and really a type of farming that is benefiting the environment. And this new term, regenerative agriculture, has come out within the last couple of years and is sort of defined by the idea that, again, you're trying to improve the environment. So, and that the word sustainable really only refers to, maintaining status quo, which isn't really true. I think people that used to call organic, something that meant very different than what conventional organic has become, and the same idea with sustainability. So I think there's a lot of people that are concerned about our environment and health, and are looking at sustainability and trying to figure out how that fits in with diets, and most of them are getting it wrong. Yeah. And if, there's certain people in the world that idolize, sports heroes. There's certain people that idolize rock stars. I particularly get starstruck having dietitians on my podcast and like therapeutic doctors. I had Dr. Guillermo Ruiz on the podcast a little while ago. Like him and I hit it off really well. But I'm particularly inspired by people who are driven by a mission. Like there's a lot of people that are really good at their jobs. You clock in, you maybe treat clients well, whether you're a personal trainer or a doctor or any kind of service provider. But then there are some people that are just driven by a greater purpose. People that are driven by doing something that is larger themselves, or at least leaving some kind of footprint to help the next generation have it a little better off than the current generation. And you're one of those people to me. And if anyone were to go onto your social media or website right now, they'll see in the last couple of years, you've spoken internationally about this. You travel quite a bit. You are constantly writing. You're constantly putting out content that I feel like is top quality. But how did you get to the point where you are now? Like, where did this all start, and where did something maybe click? What were you doing prior to being a nutrition coach? And then what clicked there to make you say, hey, something's up and I want to take my life in this direction? Yeah. Well, it's a long story, so I'm going to try to not make it as old as I am. But I was really sick as a kid. I had undiagnosed celiac disease and didn't find out until I was in my mid-20s. When I got the diagnosis, I couldn't believe that someone could be gluten intolerant. I thought, that's what you eat. And so I was eating gluten products 3 times a day. When I was told to switch my diet, there were not a lot of gluten-free products out there. And the dietitian that I saw basically just gave me a bunch of coupons to some gluten-free processed foods.
Like gluten-free crackers, gluten-free.
Yeah, gluten-free frozen meals, things like that. And they were, over 20 years ago, that it was pretty bad stuff. And so I went from my, generally low fat and, what I thought was heart healthy diet to a gluten-free version of that. And so I would have, maybe gluten-free toast for breakfast with a glass of orange juice. I would have a gluten-free sandwich with lunch. I would have gluten-free pasta for dinner, maybe with a gluten-free beer and some gluten-free cookies. So, but I was, not eating fat. I was eating mostly vegetarian, and I was never really overweight, but I definitely was in metabolic syndrome. I've saved all my labs from then, and I was pre-diabetic for sure. I was always hungry and always on this blood sugar roller coaster, and never really was finding the answers that I wanted, and kept begging my doctor to test me for diabetes. I knew there was something wrong. I mean, I would have tunnel vision and get like really sweaty if I, missed lunch by 10 minutes kind of thing. Yeah. My career at that time was working in the natural foods industry, and I was actually working for Whole Foods Market, approving all the gluten-free foods that were coming into the stores. And so I would, test the latest gluten-free brownie mix, and I'd be like, hallelujah, we have this new, it's even better than the one before, is gluten-free brownies or gluten-free lasagna or whatever.
Now, what kind of position was that with Whole Foods?
I was in marketing. But I worked with the director of grocery who, knew that I knew a lot about gluten-free products. And so he would slide me all the gluten-free stuff that was coming in. And it's funny because I still see him when I go to the Natural Products Expo and stuff. We're still friends. Anyway, once I had my second child, and I had gestational diabetes because I was just on such a crazy roller coaster.
Wow.
And that's really the first time I ever was aware of carbohydrates and so I was told to eat 30 grams of carbs per meal, so 90 grams per day. And to me at the time, that was like the most restrictive, horrible thing you could do. Like even just going, and that's not even really low carb compared to what, how I eat today. But, it just blew my mind. And I actually did feel better and did not gain a ton of weight with my pregnancy and had a normal, healthy pregnancy. Definitely the motivator for me was not having a sick baby or a 20-pound baby. So I was willing to do whatever the doctor said. And anyhow, so after I had my second child, I started working on our farm just because it was too crazy for me to have a corporate job with those hours and a husband that worked like 100 hours a week. So started working at the farm, and we were running a raw milk co-op, and it was really just we were providing a space for all these Weston A. Pricers to come pick up their raw milk. And I was like, this is crazy that they're eating all this fat. Like, this is nuts. And started learning a little bit more about it. I went to a Weston A. Price conference just to learn more about it, started eating more fat, and it actually made me feel better.
Which, not to interrupt you, but if there's anybody listening who wants to know a little more about what you were talking about, the documentary Farmageddon is a pretty good reference to like the raw milk picture and what co-ops actually are.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Kristen Canty, the director, is a very good friend of mine today, and I see her all the time. And she has a restaurant up the street from me that we sell to, and she's been advising me on my project. So,
oh, sweet, awesome, full circle.
Yeah,
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. Fine. And so anyway, I was at the Weston A. Price conference and I went up to Sally Fallon and I said, how do I become a nutritionist in this? Like, where do I go to school? What do I do? And she said, get your RD. And I was like, no way. I'm not going back to school again. School is, not in the cards. And because I looked at how many classes you'd have to take and I was like, forget it. And then I found out about Nutritional Therapy Association. So that seemed a lot more manageable to me at the time. So it was a shorter program, only 8 months. And it was very, very focused on Weston A. Price type diet. So I attended that program and I had to do a book report towards the end of the program. And this is 2010. And there was a book called The Paleo Solution that had just come out. And we were supposed to follow a diet in a diet book and then write about our experience on the diet. And so that was the diet book that I picked. And the idea, I interpreted it a little bit differently than how it was written because I don't like sweet potatoes. And so I basically just didn't eat really many carbs at all because sweet potatoes were out. Initially in the first iterations of paleo, white potatoes were out. So I was basically keto. Rob's prescription in there was a little more low fat than what I had learned through NTA and through Sally Fallon. So I was like, I'll do his diet without the sweet potatoes, but plus fat. Okay. So basically I went keto and I didn't know I was going keto. And I felt really tired for the first like 2.5 weeks. Like I was on Benadryl all day, just really exhausted. And then like by day 15, I just woke up and I had like boundless energy. I could go from breakfast to lunch without a snack. I could go, until 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon without needing lunch. I mean, it really made such a huge difference. It was even more dramatic than going on a gluten-free diet for me, as far as like the change I saw in my life. And so from then on, I was just sold on that. And I opened a practice, but I quickly realized that with this degree that I had and all the people that were coming and finding me with all these health conditions, I was a little out of scope without having my RD. And at that point, I talked to a few people and they all said, why don't you just make this your hobby for the next, I didn't know that it was going to take me almost 10 years to do it, but, why don't you just, not think about the cost?
I had no idea it took you 10 years.
It took me a really long time because I was doing it part-time. I had 2 little kids at home. I was trying to pay for it myself from my nutrition clients and some of the stock options I had when I left Whole Foods. And so it was a struggle. So, and they didn't take any of my undergrad classes. So I had to basically start over again with a new bachelor's degree.
Wow.
Starting with Bio 101, like at community colleges, anatomy and physiology and chemistry. And I was an art major undergrad, so I didn't really have much of a background in biology or biochem or anything like that. So, I was always been interested in science, but I took more like physics and stuff like that in college, not really biology type classes. So, anyway, so I started and every semester I just would knock off 2 classes. I'd try to do a winter session class. I'd try to do, so the summer intensive classes, and I just kept on going and going. And then did my internship. That was really hard, only because, working in hospitals, we know a lot about preventative medicine. It's just not a lot you can do as a dietitian working in a hospital other than, prescribe the right tube feed, which tube feeding and IV nutrition are really important lifesavers for people, but it's just not where I felt like I could make the biggest difference. And anyway, so on the other side, I'm done, and I'm really, really happy I did it because I can take insurance now, and I can, as long as I can back up what I'm doing with evidence, I can do what I want to do. And so it's really opened a ton of doors for me, and it was definitely worth the pain of getting that RD.
If there's anybody listening right now that's kind of on the fence about it, what would you say are the biggest, I would say the biggest 3 differences that once you get your RD license, what are you capable of doing? And when you say it opens doors, what do you mean by that?
Well, in most states, you can't actually take money for nutrition counseling. It's illegal. And so only RDs can do that. And even in the states that you are legally allowed to do nutrition counseling without the RD, you can only talk about healthy eating or weight loss. You can't talk about even, you have celiac disease, here's the gluten-free diet. That's considered medical nutrition therapy. And in all states, only a dietitian can prescribe a diet for a health condition. So that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
And, from a liability perspective, I had a really scary story actually of somebody who was overweight. I recommended a low carb type diet to him. And 2 weeks later, he had a heart attack.
Whoa.
And if I was not an RD, I could have gotten really sued, especially if he had died and especially if he had a really litigious wife. I mean, he started eating bacon, had a heart attack in 2 weeks. Those are really scary, real situations. And it's usually not the person that you saw that would sue you because they're usually like totally on board with an alternative treatment like low carb or keto.
Yeah.
It's their wife or their brother-in-law or their sister or something like that saying, oh my God, you don't give someone with a heart condition bacon. Right.
Yeah.
As a dietitian, I'm completely covered. As somebody who doesn't have a degree, totally, completely could have ruined my life and my children's life. Right.
Wow. Yeah.
So that's why I recommend to people that are really serious and they want to do this full time, get the RD, because the other things too is, that you can see a much wider variety of patients if you can take it. So you're seeing a lot of people that maybe can't afford to pay $200 for a nutrition consult, but they can afford a $30 copay because they're covered for insurance. There's a lot of people out there that are just looking for a dietitian that's covered by insurance, and then they find me sort of by default, and they luck out that they got me instead of another dietitian that might have told them something totally different. And just for writing books, for that authority with the press, all those things, RD is pretty much required, I think.
Yeah.
It's not the education from becoming an RD. That's not where I learned what I'm doing. It's just that credential.
Which is pretty wild. Like in some cases, I feel like personal training is very similar where, you get a lot of certifications, but you learn a lot by doing and getting around really good mentors. And it's not that it's not important. It's just, you learn a lot more by being mentored by people who have success, I think. But you mentioned something a little bit ago about the book, The Paleo Solution. Mm-hmm. And Rob Wolf's the author of that book. And that was one of the cornerstones for me as well. And part of my evolution as a coach, I started researching stress. I started researching, blood sugar, cortisol, hormone dysregulation as a coach, because you end up getting a lot of people that have, this metabolic syndrome that you mentioned before. And even, as you were talking about your past laundry list of symptoms that you were dealing with, as people are listening to that, I'm sure it sounds like a lot, but it's actually very common that mm-hmm. people are walking around with those kind of things on a regular basis and just learn to live with it. Mm-hmm. So as I'm getting people into the gym who are experiencing this, people that are CEO level attorneys, people that work 60, 70 hours a week, dealing with this chronic fatigue or metabolic syndrome, my life started shifting that way. And I actually reached out to Rob as I was writing a massive article on hormone dysregulation. I've been a fan of his blog for a while, and I actually reached out to him, and he let me post it, and I actually started writing there, and that's when I learned about you, because mm-hmm. you were also writing for Rob's website at the time. And then you and I officially met at PaleoFX, mm-hmm. in I believe 2015. And when I was there at PaleoFX, first of all, the paleo scene I think was a really it was a mixed bag for me, and I think it was a mixed bag for a lot of people. As I read Rob's book and Lauren Cordain's book, I read research about anthropology, theories on human evolution, and thought, wow, what a logical approach to eating food. Eat what human beings have eaten for a long period of time and maybe be cautious of the industrial stuff. That was like my big takeaway. Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of people got very polarized on the issue and either read it as a list of rules, or some people got turned off by the whole eat like a caveman cartoon. Mm-hmm. And as I'm going to the conference, the big panels, you were on one of the panels, and one of the topics was the state of paleo, and people are asking questions, and that was pretty neat. The whole event was pretty cool, but I think the biggest game changer for me was going upstairs to one of the smaller conference rooms, and you were on a panel about sustainable agriculture with John Moody, I think Charles Mayfield, and a handful of other people. And it was a game changer for me because I had not really thought about the whole food industry component to things and how that ultimately is a driver behind habits, why people do what they do, the food availability, and just our concept and diet dogmas come a lot from food marketing, I want to say contortion of research, all these things that I hadn't really thought about. And then the sustainability aspect, like how long can we actually produce food at this rate? And that was a big game changer for me. So fast forward a little bit now, and the paleo thing, if you want to call it a thing, has now fizzled a little bit. Keto is a bigger buzzword as far as marketing goes. And looking back at it, paleo is a good example of something that I feel like a few people got a little too dogmatic about. Some people did, not everyone. Vegetarianism, veganism is something that people get very dogmatic about, borderline religious. Mm-hmm. And now we're in a state where you're fighting a fight for sustainable agriculture and maybe fighting against the vilification of red meat against a culture that is very dogmatic about red meat specifically. And recently, the Lancet just came out with a huge commission report called the EAT. And I know you had a lot of, you'd done your homework on this, and I think that's one of the big drivers behind what you're up to now. So let's talk about the Lancet commission a little bit. And what is going on with our infatuation with vilification of red meat, and where do you feel like groups like the Lancet are getting this wrong?
Okay. Well, I think that, I did a really great podcast not too long ago with Frédéric Leroy. I might be butchering his name, but he's from Brussels, and he writes a lot. I'm a huge fan of his work on sort of anthropology and our relationship to meat, and how meat has become an unfair scapegoat for a lot of our stress about our health and the environment. And meat is a very polarizing topic in general. It represents a lot of things. It represents like power. It's the most powerful food we have. And for a lot of people, it also represents horror and disgust. And so it evokes a very strong emotion from a lot of people. So it could either mean life or it could mean the biggest poison possible, right? It's become a pharmacon. And as we are growing more and more detached from how our food is produced, and we're living in a more urban life, and so disconnected from people that actually raise animals like I do here on the farm, I totally understand how it can seem medieval to eat meat. It seems like something that we certainly can engineer protein-like substances in nice, clean factories. And so why would we murder an animal? It does seem barbaric. And anyway, I totally empathize with that story, that narrative. It's really simple. meat emits methane. That's horrible. Global warming is horrible, right? We're all going to die. But the problem is when you understand how nature works and you understand what it takes to make a healthy ecosystem, you realize that there are no vegan ecosystems in nature, that animals are actually required not only for humans, for our nutrition, but also for life. The whole planet is constantly digesting itself and regenerating and dying and rebirthing all the time. And humans are also animals, which we like to forget. And we are omnivores. And we actually require animal products, a thriving person. And there are ways of raising animals that don't have to look like the images that people are seeing when they see vegan propaganda messaging in films. And but unfortunately, people aren't seeing that. And that type of animal production is not the status quo these days, just because we've grown so large and greedy, and we have engineered ways of producing cheap food. We produce cheap grains, produce cheap processed foods, cheap fats, but also cheap proteins. And I think if there were more people involved in producing food and understanding the right way to do it, have this horrible polarizing effect on people. And so I'm really on a mission to try and show the other side, because they're showing a lot of these vegan propaganda films in schools as if it's actual science and biology, and it's totally not the way it has to be. And actually a lot of those statistics and those propaganda pieces are completely inflated and wrong.
Yeah, and I actually just spoke with a parent at our gym who wanted to talk to me about the fact that her daughter, I believe, is in 8th grade, and it was 8th or 9th grade, and the class was required to read the book Omnivore's Dilemma. And I don't want to say that's a young age to get such a complex topic, because I think that, I wouldn't want to underestimate a kid's knowledge, but like food is a very complex topic, and we like simple answers. And so I think one of the reasons why it's so hard for people to have an even-tempered conversation about food, especially when they're passionate about it, is that it's very complex and it's not simple, and there's not always a right answer. It's usually who's right or righter. Well, there's some wrong, but it's very complex. And so anyways, this girl comes home and she wants to go vegetarian immediately. Tells her mom that, she's gross for eating meat. She can't believe what was going on. And then she watched the film, I believe, What the Health. And so she basically got shocked into becoming a vegetarian. And I'm not making a case one way or another for vegetarianism, but what I do feel like is somebody like myself who did not grow up on a farm, who never had to raise an animal, and maybe it might be till I'm a teenager when teenagers are a little more vocal about things and can be very passionate about what they believe in, whether or not we understand it. We remember what it's like to be teenagers. But when you have no experience with something, then all of a sudden you see gruesome images of animals being killed, and all of a sudden it's not that you didn't know, it's just now all of a sudden you realize it really hits you that, oh, animals are killed, and now all of a sudden it becomes a shock factor, which maybe creates a dietary opinion based on that. And I'm reminded of one of the stats that I was very surprised about. The USDA has a stat that I believe in 1856, 60% of all Americans lived on farms, and now it's less than 2% of people live on farms. It's just an example of how detached we are from our food source. So what are some of the experiences you have reconnecting people with food source, and how do you get people involved with maybe avoiding this knee-jerk reaction and maybe integrate slowly into it?
Right. Our farm, we have a K-8 elementary, middle school that comes here 3 times a year, each grade.
Awesome. Awesome.
And they can walk, which is really cool because they don't have to hire a bus to drive them. They come in the snow and the rain. They come watch the sheep shearing. They learn about soil, everything. And so that's one thing that we're doing here on the farm where I live. I'm not running those groups. We have an education manager that does that, and I think it's super important. On my end, I try to do things in a more global way. I was halfway through writing a book about the nutritional, environmental, and ethical case for meat, and trying to make it sort of layperson accessible when What the Health came out. And then I decided, if that doofus can write a book, I can write, or if he can make a film, rather, I can do a film.
Right.
So that's when I found a director, came up with a treatment, and did this crowdfunder last year at this time that got us going. And so we're kind of in the middle of production on our film. And it has transitioned from a feature film into a docu-series because we just felt like there was a little too much information that we wanted to try to get across in one story. And so we're going to break it out into sections. Yeah. And I also have a book contract now with Rob Wolf. So we're co-writing a book together that is going to be the film's companion.
Wow, that is going to be absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a well-cited dive, but for someone that maybe doesn't have a PhD in soil science or nutrition, explaining how animal products are important for nutrition, environment, and why ethically eliminating all animals from the planet could do more harm than good. So those are the 2 big projects that I have going on right now. And a bunch of other side things have spun out of that. So I have now, my life has almost completely been taken over by all this meat stuff. We're still fundraising for the film. We're still filming the film. The book is almost done. And I have a lot of really big plans for distribution and promotion of all of this. And I'm still seeing patients. On the side, I have
That's
another.
You said hobby. That's what you said hobby earlier on. I know better.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, I have another couple RDs that are working with me that are taking on the bulk of my clients, but I do still have a handful of people that I'm seeing as well. But that'll probably taper down because travel season is picking up again pretty hardcore. And yeah, got a lot going on.
What's the filmmaking process been like? What have I don't know, what are some of the
It sounds so much more fun than it actually is. It's super stressful. It's super stressful to raise money. It's not my wheelhouse at all. I'm a dietitian and live on a farm, and I know about cattle and sheep and carrots. So that's been, learning about how that all works has been interesting. I have to do a lot of big pitches to large companies it's quite intimidating. The actual process of making the film. So my job on the film is, as the producer, I am like the mom of the film. So like I have to book all the travel, make all the budgets, figure out the flights for everybody, where we're going to stay, which Airbnb we're going to stay in, where are we going to shoot the interview, how many cameras do we need for this shoot, where are we hiring local people, or are we going to fly in the crew that we normally use, and what makes the most sense in this situation. I have to know where the Walmart is in case someone steps in a big pile of cow poop, which has happened. I need to know where I'm going to get lunch for everybody, and how am I going to feed everybody, where are we going to have dinner, how am I going to get the drives from my hands to the editors. It's a lot of stress. The days are really, really long. We usually start at about 5 a.m. and we'll not go to bed until after 11. On the days that we're shooting, a lot of driving, and I'm the one in charge of renting the car and driving everyone where they need to go. I mean, it's if I had known all of this before I had gotten into it, I don't know that I would have signed up for it, because I still haven't pulled a salary for any of the work that I've done on this. But I really believe that people are learning through video right now, primarily. And, there's probably a lot more people that are going to find it easier to sit down and watch an episode of a docuseries than pick up a big, intimidating book and read it. People just aren't digesting information that way. And so that's what needs to be done.
Plus, there's a huge. I feel like there's a huge need for it. And why I'm so much behind what you're doing. So much so that I wanted to bring you onto this show, so that way you could have another platform to talk about this. Because between What the Health, Forks Over Knives.
There's more coming out this year too.
I'm sure, and there's at least 8 or 10 that I'm not thinking of right now. That's been very popular in the past. They all go down this road where a story will start where we're talking about climate change. And I think most people can agree that the climate is changing and it's not positive, and that the food system needs repair. I think we can all get behind that. And most of the documentaries get about 70 to 80% of the way through that, and that animals need to be treated better, humans need better nutrition, something isn't working. And then almost on a dime, usually about an hour into the film, they'll go right into, now we need to all go vegetarian, stop eating meat, and remove animals from the food industry. And that's where there is, in my opinion, good documentaries will tell both sides of the story. Like, what happens if we do this versus if we do that? And there have not been enough that actually go down the road of, hey, what if we kept animals as part of our food system, and get into, or have Joel Salatin or some of these other people who are excellent at presenting information on regenerative agriculture. None of them are, to my knowledge, in these particular films have been reached out to. Or, as a matter of fact, I do believe that Alan Savory was mentioned in one of the films. And I particularly had been following Alan Savory's work, or at least the Savory Institutes, for a while. And in one of the films, they said, I was advised to go, the guy who did What the Health said, I was advised to go talk to Alan Savory. But I realized, I did research on Alan Savory, and he killed a bunch of elephants in Africa, in 30 years. So why would I want to reach out to him? He basically, in the film, said that I do not want to talk to somebody on the other side of this coin. And that's what a lot of people were getting, all this information. So I can't blame a lot of people for being upset about the food industry. But please, I guess, explain your position on where are we wrong with the ethical component of eating meat, and then the nutritional value, because obviously those two are two different subjects, and I know they're complicated, but where are we getting that wrong? Where are some of the myths that are being pushed out there as far as the nutritional value of red meat? Where are we getting some misinformation there? And then the ethical component to that.
All right. Well, I'll start with nutrition because it's really straightforward, because it's just basic human biology and biochemistry. We absolutely need animals. We require a certain level of protein in order to thrive, which is much higher than what the RDA is currently, which is set to the minimum amount of protein to avoid disease. And they're also set, people have interpreted about 45 grams for women and 54 for men. But those are based on a woman of 125 pounds and a man of 154 pounds, which is significantly lower than average weights of Americans.
Right.
And not only do we need more protein, but we need high quality protein, and plants, anyone can go look up the USDA database and see the amino acids that plant-based proteins have compared to animal-based proteins. It's just not the same. We also, iron deficiency and B12 deficiency are two of the most prevalent nutrients in America and in the world, and B12 is completely absent in plant-based diets, and iron is very difficult to get from just plants. It's not as bioavailable from plants as it is from animals. And even people that eat animals need to be looking at organ meats and not just muscle tissue to get the iron requirement that's needed.
It's also a very cost-effective way to eat as well. Organ meats are fairly cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're trying to lower overall carbohydrate and calories and increase our nutrient density, it's pretty impossible. It is impossible to do that without incorporating animal products in your diet. There's also really important fatty acids that you cannot get from plants. Our bodies can't make those conversions easily from plant-based fatty acids to the usable form that we need from our diets. The same with a lot of vitamins like vitamin A. It's the conversion from beta carotene, which is in plants, to active vitamin A that we actually use in our body is very difficult for almost half of all humans on the planet. So I think the nutritional argument is very easily won, and most people that I know that are vegetarian will even admit that it's not a nutritionally equivalent diet. So most people, and the idea that they don't want animals to die for their food. But there's plenty of death that happens even in a meatless diet. Monocropping is extremely damaging to ecosystems. Not only are little mammals, killed by chemicals and machinery, but entire ecosystems are wiped out to make way for fields in order to plant soy and corn and wheat. There's also, when we eliminate natural ecosystems, we're also making it really easy for hawks to come down and just pick off those animals. And so then the next, argument I will hear is that, well, if I didn't intend it to happen, then it's not as bad. And that's pretty easily, any philosopher will say death is death. And, was the death more important to that mouse because you wanted it to happen? It's still dead. And so, one large ruminant animal like a cow can provide almost 500 pounds of edible meat. And if it's raised in a good way, using intensive management where they're rotated frequently, increasing biodiversity, increasing the water holding capacity, nourishing the soil, that's one death versus all of the ecosystem destruction, all of the pollinators lost in conventional grain production. And so I think we need to be eating more animals, but more animals that are eating less grains and less grains overall in our diet. Yeah.
And I think there's an assumption that if we eliminate livestock from our food system, that it's even here in the Lancet that right now that as far as corn goes specifically, I believe 80% of our corn grown goes to animal feed. And in the Lancet, it says there will be a 75% reduction of yield gaps on current cropland. So they're assuming that all of this extra corn that we're farming will now go to humans. And from what I understand, that the corn and some of the grains dedicated towards livestock feed is not edible for humans. Am I correct in that?
So many things wrong with that statement that I don't even know where to begin, but so even cattle that are finished on a feedlot, 90% of their diet is inedible to humans. So most of the corn and soy that they're getting are actually used for other purposes first, and then they're getting things like distillers grains or soy cakes left over from the brewing process for alcohol, for ethanol, and for the soybean oil industry. So what are we going to do with all that food waste if we can't run it through a ruminant and make protein out of it? It's just going to emit greenhouse gases and rot, right?
Yeah.
And so cattle are actually extremely efficient, even feedlot cattle. And this is where a lot of people get really cranky at me. But, as a dietitian first and as a clinician first, I talk to people about what is the most nutrient dense food. And there's not huge differences nutritionally between feedlot finished beef and grass-fed beef. There are some differences, but they're not gigantic. We're just not seeing huge evidence. Grass-fed dairy, there is significant differences because it's a more fatty substance, and the difference really is in the fatty acid composition of dairy. But when we're talking about a steak versus a steak, I want someone to just eat a steak if they can't get a grass-fed steak instead of that Twinkie or that Ding Dong or whatever, that soybean cake or whatever. And then, once we look at the environment side, well-managed cattle are benefiting ecosystems, them to, help sequester carbon, which is something that we need to be doing. And grasslands are our biggest opportunity right now in order to have a carbon sink. And we can do that with cattle. We can't do that with soy or corn. And so we need to be eating more meat for our health, and we need to be eating more better meat for our ecosystems.
To help actually regenerate land.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you feel like the vegetarian or the vegan picture, the vegan euphoria is gaining steam? You shared something on Facebook today, which I shared with my audience, and that was a big picture of Bill Gates tweeting out a statistic on the environmental hazards of livestock. And, I don't think a lot of people realize how many, that there's actual science that proves that there's a benefit to having livestock and cattle as part of regenerative agriculture, but then it's kind of being shoved to the side by a little bit of star power on the other side, and a lot of money. What do you think is really fueling that? Why is there such a big push from people with a lot of money and celebrities that are pushing this agenda?
Well, it's multi-pronged. The big food industry has a lot of profit to make out of highly processed veggie burgers like Beyond Meat, which are not nutritionally equivalent at all to a beautiful grass-fed steak that regenerated ecosystems. It's not better for the environment than that, but there's certainly a lot of profit in making a product like that. And it actually costs more to the consumer per ounce to buy Tofurkey or these fake meat products compared to, just straight animal protein. Lab meat, there's even more money, right? Lab meat is all about intellectual property and owning patents to things. And it's convenient for them that it's fitting into this narrative right now of everyone's concerns about the ethical treatment of animals and the environment and health, but that's not the agenda of big food. Big food, who corporations like Nestle that paid for the Eat Lancet paper to come out, are using vegan and vegetarian minded groups to push their message. And it's the biggest form of greenwashing possible. Wow.
And, I feel like I got to put kid gloves on a little bit while I'm talking to some people about this. And I know you get occasionally, maybe it's not as bad on your end, but occasionally, as I'm going through some of your posts, you deal with a lot of backlash on this.
It's not occasionally.
I think I was being mild, and I think
it's not mild. It's really because this has taken over as people's religion. Diet is religion to people, and the problem is people who eat meat and are healthy are like, whatever. If they don't eat meat, then more for me, and that's really, really dangerous thinking because these organizations that are pushing these agendas are actually influencing policy. A meat tax was something that I saw coming from a really long time ago. I think in 2015 I wrote about it.
Yeah.
Everyone thought it was, I was crazy. I even thought maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just like thinking that they're way more sophisticated than they are. But you know what? It's an actual reality that could happen. I know in California too, we've got Meatless Mondays happening in Berkeley with the Berkeley City Council. We've got LA. They're trying to get a law that restaurants have to serve vegan entrees. Like they're now trying to coerce private businesses to cater to their ideology. And, I don't require restaurants to serve gluten-free entrees to me. Like I'll just go to a different restaurant or I'll figure it out. I bring my own food with me. This is they're making schools vegetarian. That really kills me because for a lot of kids, this is the most nutrient dense meal that they're getting. And to eliminate meat and say that was the bad part when it's really the processed food and junk that's in the school lunch. I mean, it's absolutely enraging to me that people in the real food community are just sitting back and letting all of this happen. It's totally not okay. And it's not fair that I'm the only one that's screaming about this. I'm glad that Rob has my back on it and is, taking a more active role, but it shouldn't be just the two of us. I've had a lot of meat companies tell me that they didn't want to support my documentary because their competitor was supporting my documentary and it would look bad for their brand.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, we're never going to get anywhere with this. So I am pretty fired up about this. I think we are really underestimating the amount of money and organization that these vegan groups have. There was another organization that has just offered the Pope $1 million donation to the Catholic Church if he goes vegan for Lent. They want to use the Catholic Church because it's just such a huge powerhouse of education and influence over people to push this agenda. This is not okay.
Yeah, it's horrifying to me as a parent because I have the insight as a professional, but then also as a parent that I know that the horrifying thing about this is that it influences people's decisions. When they walk into a grocery store, they will make buying decisions based off of this information that is incomplete or biased or sometimes flat out wrong. And then I know how influential the behavior of a parent can be on a child and how that can stick with a child late into their life if they're introduced to an idea as the truth. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the word religion, and they're even using a religious figure to help promote it. And they're using these things which can be psychologically damaging for a lot of people that are growing up in this environment. And that's another reason why I'm so fired up about your documentary actually getting put together, because I feel like people need a complete story on this. But then what kind of kickback have you gotten aside from what you just mentioned? Have you gotten any kickback while making your documentary? What have you dealt with as far as emails and treatment, and what have you, I guess the stuff you can mention publicly, like, I
mean, it's, I have a delete button and it's fine. We're out filming and we're not like, we're just doing interviews and we're spending a lot of time on ranches. And so, mostly we're getting, thank you for doing what you're doing. I actually get those a lot more than I get the hate mail. I applaud the passion. I'm obviously a very passionate person. I applaud the passion from which the vegetarian and vegan energy comes from. I just think that we've come to different solutions, and I see things as whole systems, and I have a different solution.
Yeah, and we're just presenting that, and I applaud you for that. And just know that you have one more person in the United States that is totally behind you. And
Thank you.
you need to get this thing done because there are not too many people that are willing to do it. And the only way that you're getting this done is through crowdsourcing. And tell us right now, because I want more people to know exactly how to help you if they can.
Mm-hmm.
How much more do you have to raise, and what kind of funds are we looking at that are still out there that you need to get?
Well, we have a couple different scenarios. So we have like this is what it could look like if it was 3 episodes. This is what it could look like if it was 6 episodes. I am talking to some pretty major foundations and corporations and even investors for the project. The crowdfunding is super, super helpful, and people can just go and donate. And we are those monies come in through a 501c3, and so it's all tax deductible, and that's all on sustainabledish.com/film. So we have a long way to go to do it the right way. So there's a lot of really bad documentaries out there that are budget documentaries that are only seen by true believers. We're trying to really move the needle in a really big way, and that requires pretty significant funds. We're not doing, lavish accommodations or, again, I have not been a salary for all the work that I've been doing on this. We're totally being as economical as possible, but we also need to have a really high production value because this needs to compete with, this will be the one antidote to the, however many anti-meat messages that are currently out there.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm gonna put a link in the show notes where people can donate to you, and I really hope we're able to move some kind of needle for you, because you yourself are a needle mover, and we need to put more effort behind you, or at least some kind of support. But we don't have much time. I want to wrap up in a minute, but this is the Inward Investing Podcast, and it's geared towards inspiring motivated people who sometimes get so wrapped up in their mission that sometimes it's hard to lose sight of yourself. So I just have a couple quick questions that I want to know from you as you go through this whole mission-driven business, and you are taking care of kids, you're taking care of your business, you're putting together a documentary. What are some boundaries you've set up in your own life to make sure that you don't burn out, to make sure that you're actually taken care of?
Well, I do take really good care of my sleep hygiene. I'm pretty vigilant when I'm not on a shoot about getting at least 8 hours of sleep every single night in a very dark room. I also really pay attention to my diet and exercise, and I'm at the gym and do yoga a ton. I do a red light sauna, which has been hugely helpful as well. But it's when I'm not working on the film, I'm taking care of kids, or I'm traveling, or I'm seeing clients. So I don't take a break. Right now, I can't take a break. So I can go to the gym and take a little break, but I don't I haven't had much, I'm taking a family vacation actually, next week. My family's going to be surfing. I'll probably surf and hang out with them a little bit, but I'm going to be working a lot down there too. It's just, that's what I need to do right now in my life.
Yeah. Moms generally don't have time off, and then you have the other part on top of that. All right. Second of 3 wrap-up questions. How do you talk to your kids about this? How do you talk to them about diet and the conundrum? Do you talk to them about it at all, or do you have a way of going about it?
Yeah, they're pretty educated and all of that. I mean, they'll definitely come home and tell me when people are, just went vegan or something. We've got a pretty big community of vegans and vegetarians in our town. Or they'll tell me what kind of junk food was at so-and-so's house that they got to eat, and they'll like rub it in my face, which is really funny. So my kids are a little bit older. They're 13 and 15. And so they can make their own choices. And I don't always love the choices that they make. We, do our best at home, and then they have their own money. They work on the farm, both of them. And, sometimes they're buying soda or candy or other stuff, and I can't be there and say no, right? But I can also point out the stomach ache that they have later and say, well, what do you think that's from? So they also actually, interestingly, don't sleep over at other friends' houses, and that I think they both learned really quickly, because we did allow a few sleepovers, and it's amazing how many other families don't have the same sleep rules we have at our house. Like, it's time to go to bed, and like, I will not tolerate like after 9:30 any noise. Yeah. Like, no way. And my kids would feel really hammered the next day. And so they both actually don't sleep over other people's house. They have friends that sleep over here, and I don't even have to like for that. They just know that they'd rather have someone sleep over here, or they'd rather just sleep in their own bed. So that's kind of cool.
Pretty good self.
So, and in general, they make pretty good choices with their food and lunch and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm of the mindset that your kids aren't going to become you, and they may not make the same choices you do, but if you make something normal enough for long enough as a way of life yourself, at least they have that center point of what is normal, and then they can make their choices from there. So I guess my final question is, do you have, and it's okay if there's none, do you have any nighttime rituals or morning rituals that you do every morning or every night? Or are things just so chaotic, you just take what you can get?
Well, I guess this morning was typical. I was up at about 5, which my body just normally wakes up at 5 or between 5 and 6 every day. And I'm the first one up always. I have 2 border collies that are always eager to get outside, but particularly because we have new lambs being born often overnight, they're really excited to run outside and peek in the barn and see if there's any new babies. So I let the dogs out, I have some tea, and I start cooking breakfast for everybody. So I make eggs and stuff for breakfast. And then at nighttime, and then I usually go to the gym in the morning. That's often my routine. Sometimes I go midday, but it's often just first thing. At night time, after, when I'm getting ready to go to sleep, I hit the sack at like 9:30, and I'm just out, and it's pretty close, or even sometimes earlier than when my kids go to sleep at this point, and everybody better be quiet. So I wouldn't say that there's like elaborate rituals right now in my life. It'd be nice if there were, but it's just not how it is.
Yeah, that's cool. I like to ask every guest, see if I can get a consensus, but so far there is none.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have for you. And, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day, out of your month, or spend this on the podcast. And again, I know somebody's going to get a lot out of this. You do a lot of really good work, and as many people as possible need to get behind this film to make sure it gets done. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. This has been the Inward Investing Podcast with Mike Ritter, and I will see you next week.